Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. My name is Cade, and today we are going to be starting a two-part discussion of the Harry Potter franchise. This will be part one where we discuss the first four movies, and for today I am joined by some returning guests. Today I'm joined by Cassidy, Hunter, and Felicity. All right, let's welcome everybody back first. Cassidy, welcome back.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be back.
Absolutely. Hunter, welcome back.
Thanks. Good to be back.
Felicity, welcome back.
Hey, thanks for having us.
So, going through all four movies, one thing that I do want to ask before we get started, of all four of these movies, which one is your favorite?
My favorite from the first four would probably be the second movie, Chamber of Secrets, but I'm close to the third one, Prisoner of Azkaban, as well. That's probably number two.
I think out of the four, it's definitely Goblet of Fire.
I would agree. Goblet of Fire, the action, the drama, the intensity, it gets me every time.
But yeah, let's get started. Let's start off with The Sorcerer's Stone from 2001. So, looking back at this movie, The Sorcerer's Stone or The Philosopher's Stone, most people don't rank it as one of their favorites in the franchise, but as a movie and as the first movie in the franchise, where does it sit with the three of you?
I would say I actually really like it. I am probably different than most people where I kind of prefer the first four films over the last four films, but that's only because when it gets like too serious, like it's more anxiety ridden throughout the series. And so I just as a child just growing up with that sort of magical element, I connected to that more growing up. So I actually really rank it highly, but like it probably is not in my top four, but maybe close to number four. It's hard.
Yeah, out of the whole series, like the first two, I think are probably my least favorites, but that doesn't mean I don't like them. Like I think they're good movies and like I will always watch them, but just compared to the other films and like what I like more, it's probably like my least two favorites. I just love like the character development that we get through each movie, and I love seeing them like grow up and have to face like not even the challenges that are like presented to them, but also just like being a person. Like I really like seeing all of that happen in the later movies.
I'm very obsessed with the set design in that entire film. I think the props were enormous compared to the children, so they kind of added like this magical essence, and it was I think a good introduction to the wizardry world because it obviously gets far more intense with the props and the characters and the dragons and the demons and all that. So I think it was a good introduction, and it was like more playing with magic rather than it being super dark in the beginning. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think that actually one thing I do appreciate about this movie and all the movies in general is just the cinematography and production design of all these movies. And actually, one thing I wanted to ask both Hunter and Cassidy. I mean, Cassidy, you kind of answered this, but I just wanted to go into it a little further. So, for you and Hunter, as you know, a cinematographer and as an artist, when you look back at these films, would you say that they're inspiring?
Yeah, 100%. I think they evolved their set design throughout, but kept it pretty cohesive at the same time. So it never looked fake. It always felt like we were in this realm that felt very real, but very not real at the same time. So I think they were very successful in keeping the same production design tone throughout.
Yeah, I feel like I think it's shot like so beautifully, but I love that it feel like Cassidy said, like it feels real, but you know that you're in a world that's not real. So just like the world building that they do throughout the entire series, I think is like really well done. And also I think it's interesting that like, we have different directors in, like some of the different movies, like their same director was in like two of them and then it moved to like somebody else and then like somebody else for I think like the last three or something. But just like stylistically how cohesive they still remain throughout the entire series, because this is like something I had an issue with like in the Hunger Games. So I just like really appreciate that.
But yeah, and actually going off of what Hunter just said, yeah, the franchise did have different directors. They had four different ones. They had Chris Columbus for the first two, they had Alfonso Cuarón for the third one, Mike Newell for the fourth, and David Yates throughout the rest of the franchise. And actually, this next question I wanted to ask Felicity about. So, when you look back at the franchise, do you think that having different directors for different entries is a good thing, or do you usually prefer it when they have the same director?
Don't mind if it's different directors because sometimes somebody else can tell the story the right way for that time of your life. So I think that Chris Columbus doing the first two films, they were definitely more magical and mystical for children and saturated and everything. And then once it starts getting kind of darker themes, we see a switch in the directors into like these darker tones and narratives and everything that maybe Chris Columbus might not have been able to do throughout the whole series. And I actually did watch a few YouTube videos on this topic actually when I was researching for this, and there was that talk of that sort of transition between directors, and I saw this person spoke about where Mike Newell, I think he did the fourth one, he treated it, or he spoke about it as if he was treating it like a competition instead of trying to build off of somebody else's world, and where he said he wanted to do the dark themes and everything, which is what Alfonso did in the third movie. And so it seemed like he was trying to like do something different but also keep that dark element, and instead of like maintaining or just like building off of like what was set before him and making a nice continuity of themes, he'd like did something a little different and changed a lot of things, I guess, from the book, or left a lot of things out from the book, which I haven't read them, but like through the analysis of the video I watched. So I think it helps, because I definitely don't think we could see the last film in the same realm as the first film. And if we did, it probably wouldn't be as impactful and one of your favorites. So.
Well, and also one thing I noticed looking back at this movie is I always appreciate how each Harry Potter movie, at least most of them, always have a winter setting. You know, each year it obviously takes place over an entire year, and we always get to see winter and Christmas. And with that, do you think that these movies count as Christmas films?
I know that we talked about this, texting, that you said that your family always rewatches it. And now this may become one of my traditions as well in like November or December, because it just is such a cozy movie. The first few, and then the rest of them can, they have their good moments. But yeah, I think for some, they definitely could be. I mean, if there's winter in it, then I'll count it as a Christmas movie.
I feel oddly that a lot of the lighting gives Christmas time. It has like this golden hue to it, especially in the Great Hall. It's lit very much to set a cozy feeling. And so I think that and Christmas are kind of hand in hand, but I don't think it's inherently like a Christmas movie. I think there are the same warm, fuzzy feelings that you get in the environment that sets the pace for that Christmas kind of tone.
Yeah, I feel like it's the same conversation as like Die Hard, and I think it's like fun to say that it's a Christmas movie, but like I have no real opinion on it.
One other thing I did want to bring up is this movie has one of our friend Chloe's favorite quotes from the entire franchise: "Troll in the dungeon," when Professor Quirrell runs into the main hall and screams out "Troll in the dungeon."
That's true. I didn't know that was one of Chloe's favorite lines. That's funny.
Well, and actually, one thing I wanted to get your opinions on is a hidden detail in this movie, and I have one for each of these movies, but here's the one for Sorcerer's Stone. So this is during the Sorting Hat ceremony, where Harry's scar starts burning when he looks up at Snape. What I like about this detail is that this is secretly being caused by Professor Quirrell, because he has his back turned to the crowd, and Voldemort is on the back of his head, which means that he's pointing towards Harry. So when you look back at this hidden detail, like, do you think it's a really good one?
Definitely. I think it's one of those things that you have to watch again to realize, or maybe you have a really good memory and you're like, oh, I understand. But yeah, for me, it was one of those things where I had to go back and watch that and then kind of understand it through that way. But I think it was definitely a smart thing for them to insert to keep us questioning what's going on. Why is it burning? Like, who knows? But yes, I think it was a great little add-in.
I don't think I noticed it like ever as a kid until like I read that we got to see it. But then throughout the film, it happened more times. So we got to clock onto those moments too, which was fun.
All right, well, why don't we move on to Chamber of Secrets next?
I don't know why the first one isn't as memorable to me, but the second one is. I think it's because everybody sort of has this camaraderie in this one. Like they're already friends, they've already established everything. The first one's kind of an establishing one, and this is like the first movie with them all knowing each other. And I just love the storytelling and the flashbacks and just the lore kind of unraveling itself a little bit at a time. And it's a mystery like the whole time, and I love a mystery. So of course, the first one kind of has that as well, but once again, it's all setting up the story, the whole franchise. So I guess, yeah, and I would feel the climax in the first one isn't as crazy to me as the second one is. And it's so much more energy and I don't know, a bigger thing happening. Like the snake, it's just so much more like scary, but like still not too scary. Hence why I enjoy it. But yeah, I think that's why. And just but I mean, in the first one, I do love the chess scene. So
I think they really nailed it on the head with the visual effects as far as Dobby and the basilisk and the spider. And was it I forgot the name of the bird that turned into flames.
The Phoenix.
The Phoenix, yes. That they were all just like, it was magical to watch. It was very entertaining. And I think as far as keeping me watching, they did a great job at that with all these new characters that they introduced were not necessarily characters, but creatures. And so it kind of gave us a little bit more insight as to what they're up against throughout the rest of the films.
I feel like, like the first one is just like world building and introducing characters and like where we are and whatnot. And then this one is like, they're there, they're more comfortable. And I feel like we just really dive into like more, of like the world. And also like I love that we see like Tom Riddle. And I just like love that whole arc of it. So this is definitely like my favorite out of the two.
Yeah, and I think one of the reasons I like this movie better than the first one is, like you guys said, the first one is a little bit more about the world building and just establishing the mythology. But yeah, with this one, I really liked the mystery, like Felicity said, of who opened the Chamber of Secrets. But also, one thing that I do appreciate about the movie is after Hermione gets petrified by the basilisk, it was kind of fun seeing Harry and Ron really have to use their brains. So because Hermione's usually the smart one. So it's kind of nice to see the two of them trying to figure this whole thing out together. So I think that was a fun part to explore in the movie.
I agree.
And actually, here's something that I find surprising. And Felicity, I think you might want to touch on this part. So, when it comes to the books, this is one of the shortest ones in the series. But interestingly enough, this is the longest movie in the franchise. Do you find that surprising at all?
Yeah, I am actually kind of surprised. I guess, maybe there's a lot of good details in the book that they didn't want to let go of. But I know that the third book's kind of long, right? Or something. Or it was like the third or the fourth one's like a longer one or something. And so that's interesting.
Well, also, this movie has one of my favorite sets from the entire franchise, and that is the Chamber of Secrets itself. I just thought that there was so much detail put into that set. I loved how it looked. I thought Chris Columbus and the entire team did such a great job putting that together. And actually, Cassidy, when it comes to the Chamber of Secrets, has anything ever stood out to you in particular about that set?
I really like the color palette of it. I like the lighting. I do like the setting, but I love just the sound and echoing. I think all the mix of the creative direction they went worked really well. So probably nothing in specific. I just think it all works together beautifully.
Yeah, and also this movie is also what introduced us to the backstory of Voldemort when we found out that he was Tom Riddle. We got to learn how he was at Hogwarts. We found out that he was the heir of Slytherin. Did you enjoy learning about Voldemort's backstory, or did you like it better when he was more of a mystery to the audience?
I love learning the backstory. Honestly, I really kind of wish we had like a prequel type thing. I know it's like hard because people don't really want to give money to that woman. And so it's understandable that they don't maybe want to do it. But I know we talked about they're making a TV show, but I wish they would just do it like a prequel type thing. I would love to like see that whole time while he's at school or like I love a villain origin story or even back when Harry Potter's parents were at school. Like I would love to see like a prequel of that. So I really enjoyed the backstory and getting to learn more about him. I felt like they didn't give us too much. We learned enough of what we needed to know at that point.
Yeah, I feel like I really like it because like we're introduced to like Tom Riddle, but I feel like you still have the mystery of who is Voldemort. You know what I mean? Like we're getting his past a little bit, but like the whole mystery surrounding him is still there, even though like you're introduced to him. So yeah, I just really enjoy like the way that they kind of like introduce his character throughout the films.
I also really like it because we get to see as humans, we like to relate to things. And so we can't like relate to what Voldemort actually like what we know as Voldemort. We can't relate to that. We're like, ew, you're gross, you're scary. I want nothing to do with you. As soon as we see Tom Riddle, we're like, okay, maybe we'll give Voldemort a chance. We'll hear him out. Obviously, no, because he's terrible. So but like it does make as viewers be like, okay, we can hear his backstory because maybe he was a human and normal at some point in his life. So I think it's important to show universally him as Tom Riddle.
And you know what else is cool? This movie also had a character who I feel is kind of underrated, and that character is Gilderoy Lockhart, played by Kenneth Branagh. He was a character who I wish could have appeared again in the franchise. And you know, the thing is, he might have been an egomaniac, but I think that he really brought a lot of energy and comedic presence to the screen, so that was always fun. And I think Kenneth Branagh was really good in the role. And actually, fun fact, Jason Isaacs, who played Lucius Malfoy, tried out for the role of Lockhart before he was cast as Lucius. And honestly, kind of glad that he didn't get the role of Lockhart. I think that he was perfect for the role of Lucius. I don't know. Would you guys like to have seen that?
Yeah, no, I don't think I need. I mean, I can see the two egos, like they're both egotistical people. So I can see where he could do well with that. But yeah, no, I think he's just too stern. I can see sort of that glint of humor in him. I feel like there's always a line with people who are very stern to have that sort of like goofy look in them. Could go one way or the other. But yeah, no, definitely not.
Well, actually, there is one scene in this movie that has gotten a little bit sadder over the years, ever since he passed away. So obviously, a lot of actors from the franchise have passed away in time, but one of the more recent ones was Robbie Coltrane, who played Hagrid. At the end of the movie, there's that line where Harry hugs him and he says, "It wouldn't be Hogwarts without you, Hagrid." Part of what makes that, sad, not only with him passing, is there was recently, a couple of years ago, there was the Harry Potter 20th year reunion. One of the things that Robbie Coltrane said was, "Years from now, I won't be here, but Hagrid will." Watching that in the reunion and then going back and looking at this movie, when Harry says that to him, "There's no Hogwarts without you, Hagrid," that just makes that scene just a lot more sad. You know what I mean?
No, I agree. I was when I was watching them, I was like, "Oh my God, I can't believe he's gone." Like thinking about it. They did great casting because all these people were like the age they needed to be or looked like the age they needed to be. But now that we're getting older, like it's just so sad to think about it when you watch them. But that's a really sweet line at the end of that I didn't pick up on. So thanks for mentioning that.
Well, why don't we get into the hidden detail for this movie, Chamber of Secrets? Here's the detail that I really like. It might not be a huge detail, but here's what's cool about it. This is the section of the film where Harry finds Tom Riddle's diary and he starts writing in it, and then he gets sucked inside and he's inside Tom Riddle's memory. What I like about this is that as Harry's writing in the pages of the diary, you see him surrounded by all this candlelight while he's sitting in the dormitory. And then when he's inside Tom Riddle's memory, everything's black and white. But not only is he the only thing in color, you also see the candlelight flickering on him. I think that that's such a really great detail. I mean, again, it might not be a big one, but detail is just everything, It's just what makes it feel so much more rich.
I feel like that's just such a clever, like, cinematography move. I feel like, yeah, establishing him, with the candlelight, and then, like, we can just see the two different shifts and, like, the two different tones of it. So I just feel like it was a really creative move on their part.
Yeah, no, I didn't even notice it when I watched it before. I knew he was in color, but I never noticed the candle flicker. So it's a nice little nod to some continuity and reality. Because I mean, they definitely didn't have to do it, but it just like Hunter said, makes it so much more better, like interesting.
I honestly didn't notice it either, but it just goes to show you their attention to detail with everything, down to like the very little candle flicker on his face. That obviously matters. So I just think it was, yeah, another thing that they added in that was really special, and it worked very well for what they were trying to convey.
Yeah, moving on to the next movie, Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. So this is often considered the best entry in the entire franchise. And I mentioned during our last discussion that it isn't my favorite, but I still rank it in my top three. But where does it sit with all three of you? Is it one of your favorites, or top three at least?
It's not my top 3. I can say that.
It is also not my top three. It's okay, but it's not like, I just like didn't like the characters as much. I didn't feel like I could relate to them. So that's obviously a personal opinion. But yeah, I was just like, I like the Dementors and I like the train in the first scenes. I thought they were spooky. I did like that. That kept me on my toes throughout the whole thing. But everything else I was kind of just like, meh. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that there's like a lot about this movie that I really love. And there's like, with Sirius and everything, there's a lot of like that I love. But just like overall, if we're talking about like all 8 movies, like it's not a top 3. But that's not to say that I don't like this movie, and there's not like a lot of parts that I don't like really appreciate.
And what about you, Felicity? What makes it good enough to be one of your two favorites?
I would say it's just more of that backstory building. I love the unraveling of history, and especially when we're kind of in the dark as to who Voldemort is or how he became who he is. So I think that whole mystery of his backstory is just really interesting to me. So getting to meet Sirius and Lupin, the like rat turning to Pettigrew, humans turning into animals. I know we have like Professor McGonagall, but to meet more and get more of that backstory is just really interesting. And it's a more emotional movie, I would say. It starts to become a more emotional movie with learning more about Harry's parents and just like connecting to his parents' friends. But the only thing I would say that I don't care for as I get older about the film is Turning Back Time. When I was a kid, loved it, loved that. But now as an adult, I can totally see the flaw in it.
Well, I will say that one thing I always do enjoy and appreciate most about this movie is just the darker the direction that it took compared to the first two movies. And obviously this is the one that brought in Alfonso Cuarón to be the director. And I think that this is the where you can really tell, when you watch a movie, you can tell that it's by a different director, which is fine, it's a good thing. And I think this is something that stayed relatively present throughout the remainder of the franchise. It continued to get more darker and serious. And would you say that this is the entry where the franchise really figured out what it wanted to be?
Yeah, it is kind of like the movie where everything kind of starts to fall into place. I feel like the first two are very like magical and whimsical, but this is like the first movie where it's like, oh, there's a lot of dark stuff that we're going to see and that like we're just being introduced to, and just like a lot more lore with like Sirius Black and everything. So yeah, I feel like this is the movie. And then just like the characters, like with Malfoy and like, Slytherin and everything, like their kind of like rivalry. I feel like we really see it in this one. So yeah, I feel like this is just like the first big stepping stone into like all the other movies.
Yeah, I think that the costumes and the color started to mature a little bit in this one. They're not as bright and happy because I think they're trying to adapt with the character development. So we're kind of seeing that shift because we're starting to get to know the characters' challenges a bit more. So we kind of have to the audience needs to be feeling that. So they're shifting it with their direction of color and wardrobe and lighting and all that stuff to make you feel a certain way towards what they're going through.
Yeah, I agree with what Hunter and Cass have said. When I was researching, heard discussion of the transition from like the Chris Columbus to Alfonso. The movie is totally darker. I think even the logo is like different. I think I saw them mention this one's silver and the first two movies are gold, which is interesting. I never noticed that until it was pointed out to me. But it is, yeah, such a darker film. But I don't know if maybe it needed more transition or because it was just very starkly, but I definitely enjoyed it. I think it goes with the narrative. But I think in the third movie, it just starts to paste this gloom over the series. And so but it does help with those really sentimental moments because those do feel warmer. So you kind of cherish them more when it happens. So I don't mind it. Yeah. The transition.
Just like I don't have like a lot to say about this, but I feel like it's really interesting watching this movie in comparison to like Pan's Labyrinth that he also did, because like tonally and just like the color palettes are like so similar. Like I feel like I can just really see like the inspiration from both of these movies like side by side.
I was going to mention that because there's a lot of similarities, and the children aren't necessarily helpless because you don't feel the need to save them because they're doing it themselves.
Well, and something that I think this movie does really well, and this relates to all the movies, but I really like how this movie is able to include so many different plot threads without feeling overcrowded or anything. That's something that I think the entire franchise does so well. But when it comes from this movie, aside from Sirius Black, we also have Peter Pettigrew, we have Dementors, there's a werewolf, there's the whole legend of the Grimm, aka the Omen of Death. I just love how each movie, this one especially, manages to balance all these different elements so well. And that's something that I think I give the movie a lot of credit for.
Yes, there's a lot of lore unlocked in this film. And I feel like they don't spend too much time on one thing. I feel like they do the perfect amount of time on each thing and they all connect. They're not exposing something for no reason. It all links together. So I would say that they do it in a cohesive way.
Well, and also one thing I notice about this movie and the book as well is that this is the only entry in the franchise where Voldemort doesn't appear in any capacity whatsoever. We see his physical presence kind of in the first movie, in the fourth one, the fifth, and 7 and 8, but he then appears as a memory in the second and sixth one. But this is the only one in the franchise where he doesn't make any appearance whatsoever. So I think that's something that really makes this movie stand out and makes it so unique compared to all the other ones.
Yeah, it is kind of crazy that they just show him like that in like the fourth one or whatever. I know I'm jumping ahead, but it is kind of crazy when you think about that. Like there's no sort of, I didn't even realize until you said that. So
I was gonna say didn't even realize that either until you just said that. I was like, oh yeah.
I am in the same boat. I did not realize that.
Well, and also, I think that this movie gave us arguably two of the best characters in the entire franchise, Sirius Black and Remus Lupin, two characters who I absolutely enjoy. And they're both just so fun to follow. And I think that they were just so perfectly cast by Gary Oldman and David Thewlis. Are they characters who you also enjoy following throughout the franchise?
it's interesting though because obviously Gary Oldman is like Dracula from Bram Stoker's Dracula. And I like never realized that they were the same people. There's so many people in this film that I don't realize like they are who they are in real life. So now, like as an adult going back and looking at it, it's a different lens. But yeah, I think that they were cast perfectly. And the just the costume design is amazing. I know Cass will probably touch on that, but once you finally see Sirius Black like in his full form the first time, it's just I don't know. It always sticks with me. But yeah, it is definitely really sad later on when that happens. And yeah, that's probably more of a reason why I would like the first four films than the last four.
I think the only character I just, when I was referring to earlier was Peter Pettigrew. I've always had an issue with him. I just really can't stand him and he just bugs me to watch. I think it's his face. And so that's the only reason. I love the other characters. They're great. I think they develop the story into something obviously far more interesting and more entangled than we had thought. And so I really enjoy those characters. It's just that little rat man I don't like. And so I just need to set it straight. And that's all. That's all I have to say.
I love Sirius's character throughout this. Like when we touch on this next time, I'll talk about it more, but like I hate his death. His death is like not a satisfying death to me, and I feel like they could have done it in a much better way. But I love his character, and I really wish that like we had more time with him and Harry throughout the whole like series. I feel like we definitely didn't get enough of that relationship because he really was like a father figure to Harry the entire time, but it's mentioned and we kind of see it, but like I feel like it's one of those things where you just really want more. But in this movie specifically, I love how it's kind of like he's almost seen as like, this like bad guy, and then it totally like, 180s. And so I just love that kind of twist.
Yeah, I think the Harry Potter franchise is definitely known for having great twists. And part of that is because, like we were talking about earlier, most of them include some element of mystery, especially when it comes to this movie. What is the connection between Harry and Sirius? So that's definitely something I enjoy. But one other thing I did want to bring up is actually, Hunter, I wanted to ask you about this part. So I know that this isn't one of your favorite movies in the franchise, but just from this perspective, one thing I do appreciate about this movie specifically is definitely the cinematography. I think that the cinematography in this movie is so incredible, and I would argue that this is one of, if not the best looking movie in the franchise. I think that Alfonso and the cinematographer Michael Saracen did such an incredible job capturing the beauty and eeriness of Hogwarts, especially when it comes to the film's darker tone and storyline.
Yeah, I definitely like the, change that it had from like the first two movies, but I would actually argue that like Half-Blood Prince is one of the most beautiful movies out of the series, which is also, it's not just like the romance and whatever that I like about it. Like I think it's just like really beautifully shot. But yeah, I really like the different stylistic approach that they take to this movie specifically, and just like those darker tones. And like, I don't know, I don't have a lot to say specifically about it, but I would argue that Half-Blood Prince is like probably the most beautiful out of all of them. But also, while I'm unmuted, I just wanted to mention really quick that I think this movie is really interesting to watch compared to the first two, because specifically when we're introduced to like Peter Pettigrew and like he, is not a rat anymore, like that scene specifically, I feel like we see like how good of actors like Harry and Ron and Hermione are. I feel like that's like one of the first times in these three movies that you're like, oh, I don't know. I don't know if anyone else feels like that, but I was like, oh, like they're acting. I just feel like that's interesting.
Well, and one of the last things I wanted to touch on before we move on to Goblet of Fire So in this movie, one of the reasons I think why this isn't a favorite for Hunter, Cassidy, and maybe why it might not be Felicity's personal favorite is this. So this movie includes the infamous time turner, as we all know. I will say that this is kind of the reason why this isn't my favorite in the franchise. And like, I'm not saying that it was badly executed or anything. I think it was done really well. It's just when you think back to it, when you continue on throughout the franchise, you look back and it's like, okay, so what happened to the time turner? Like, did they just get rid of it? Did they just forget about it or something? I don't know. It's just always bothered me because I mean, you're gonna introduce time travel and then just never bring it back, not even once. Don't get me wrong, I still love the movie, but it's just always been one thing that keeps it from being my favorite. I don't know, where does the time turner sit with you? I know where it sits with Felicity.
I mean, I'll probably just like repeat what I said pretty much. Like, it's just why couldn't it be used in the future? Like, movies, exactly what you said. Did we just forget about it? I think that there could have been a totally different outcome. They could have done something else instead of creating time travel. And I feel like it was like an element in our film classes when we were in school. I feel like I remember there being conversations about leaving out devices that could ruin the plot or something like that. And I feel like it's one of those things that if you have that, then there's no conflict for the rest of the series. But I digress. I'll let somebody else.
Yeah, I feel like that probably is like a big component of why this is not my favorite out of the four. I just feel like it's kind of like silly almost. Like, I don't know. I feel like, yeah, maybe I think they say at the end of it, like it was given back to Professor McGonagall. But throughout all the other movies, like, why couldn't they just have asked her for it? Because she would have just given it to them if they're like fighting Voldemort. You know what I mean? So I don't know. It just kind of feels a little silly.
I think I read that, and this could be wrong, so I'm not gonna make this up, but Hermione was using the time reverse to take extra classes,
Yes.
which I'm like, that's so dumb. I mean, it's so Hermione, but like, I'm like, we could have, that could have been used. But yeah, I agree with everything that's said. I'm just like, it's a little flaw, I guess. It's just a little flaw, but it's yeah, a little like, meh, we could have used it somewhere else.
Well, and also before we move on to Goblet of Fire, there was one hidden detail I wanted to bring up in this movie. So it's the scene where Hermione punches Draco as they're approaching Buckbeak. So in this scene, as Hermione takes out her wand and she starts threatening Draco, if you look, there's that shot where you can see all of them in frame, and then you get the entrance of the bridge. But if you look really close at the entrance of the bridge, you can see a hand move out of view. The reason why is because that's Hermione's hand after she and Harry use the time turner and go back in time. I think that this is such a great detail. I know it's really small and hard to notice, but I think it's such a unique thing. And Hunter, is it a detail that you like from a cinematography perspective?
Yeah, I feel like they do so many things like this in the Harry Potter series where it's just like that attention to detail and like these little things that you wouldn't notice unless like you're really looking for it that makes it so interesting. And like there's so many movies where I watch it and I'm just like, okay, I'll never watch that again. But like these movies are something where it's like I feel like you have to watch them multiple times to be able to pick up on like every new little detail because the first time you're just really like getting the lore and like understanding the story, but then like, second, third watch, you're like, oh, they did this and this and this. And I just think that's so interesting, all that attention to detail.
I agree with Hunter. Yeah, just the attention to detail and like these little hidden things that you're finding I like didn't even know about. So again, just like hats off to you for finding these little things because they are really interesting and niche. And so yeah, very, very detail oriented these script writers are.
Yeah, and I mean, if you're gonna later on show that Harry's the one that formed the Patronus, when he thought it was his dad, then yeah, you have to have those little tiny things in there too, because people are gonna be looking out for them when they rewatch it. They're gonna be like, "Wait, do you see she moves her hand? There's no way you wouldn't have seen that in the background from that angle." So these people, they be thinking.
But yeah, moving on to the next movie, Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. And I know that this is a favorite for Hunter and Cassidy, so I'm sure they'll be excited to talk about this one. And actually, I have a fun fact before we really get into it. So, did you know that this almost got split into two films?
That is interesting. I did not know
No, I
that.
did not. Yeah, me neither.
Yeah, because of how big the book is, they almost split it into two movies. Although I'm glad that they didn't, because I think that might have been maybe confusing for some fans.
I feel like I'm interested to see like how they would have split it up. You know what I mean? Because I can understand. Yeah, I don't know. I'm just like, how would they have done that?
Yeah, what would the climax have been? for the first half. Like, I just don't understand.
The U-Ball, that would have been the climax.
The Yule Ball. When Ron is grumpy. That's the climax.
Ron.
But yeah, I think that agreeing with Hunter and Cassidy, I think that this is definitely my personal favorite entry in the franchise. It's always the one that I remember the most fondly, just when I look back at it from when I was younger. I always thought that the storyline and the concept of the Tri-Wizard tournament was so great and so unique. I always thought that was fun. I also loved all the different challenges with the dragons, the mer people, the maze that they had to go through. I thought it was just so creative and exciting. And that's definitely one thing I also really appreciate and respect about this franchise is the creativity. That's just always something that's so fun to see.
Yeah, I would say so. I think this one was more CGI focused compared to the like second and third. Not saying that it's any less entertaining. I think it's just a different, like we were filming in like this like the sub-aqueous environment with like the mer people. Like we're very unfamiliar. We're already feeling like in that position where we're like, oh Harry, we want to save you because we don't know like where we are now. Like everything's a little mixed up. So I think it adds an element of definitely like a challenge to the character and to the filmmakers. They decided to like completely shift their environment. So I think it was a good shift though, because I think that one was the scariest one to me, just because of the different environment shifts.
I feel like I'm like, I keep saying this, but I love just seeing them be real people and be like real teenagers in the midst of all this going on. But also again, like just like the world building that they do, because I feel like in the first three, we think of Hogwarts almost as if like it's the only magical school out there. But then we see all of these other schools and you're like, oh, this world is so much bigger than just like Hogwarts being this one school. So I find that really interesting. But then, yeah, I just love, like the darker tones that it takes. I love Ron and Hermione's like love interest kind of like blooming. And yeah, I just love the action. I just think this one's like, I just find it so much more interesting than the first three.
Well, and Felicity, when it comes to Goblet of Fire, I know that it's not your personal favorite, but where does it sit with you in the franchise? Is it one of your favorites?
Yeah, I would definitely say it's one of my favorites. Once I rewatch the first four, the last four, it might change, but I would say it's one of my top like 4, 3, or something like that. It's definitely so interesting, and I definitely had a hyper fixation on it when I was a kid. Like Hermione's dress was like flooding my small, but like my little bit of social media I had back then. I was definitely like on the interwebs looking up all of that stuff and wanting to buy it, and like going to Hot Topic and they had all the merch for Harry Potter. But yeah, it's definitely one of the better ones. And I like that sort of teenager world building, like Hunter mentioned. It's nice to see them be normal, like wizard teenagers, I guess, and see a different side than being at Hogwarts. I do kind of wish that we got to see more of the wizarding, the Quidditch World Cup. I wish we got to see like more of that, just kind of being outside of Hogwarts and everything.
Well, and also one thing I do like about the plot of this movie is it's fun to see Harry in this competition with all these other champions. We have Victor, we have Fleur, we have Cedric. And what I like about the fact that he's so much younger is that he's also so much less experienced than all the other champions, but he's also still hold his own because of how much he's been through. And I think it's fun to see him struggle so much and try to survive throughout these tasks, because it's a lot more fun to just see the hero struggle rather than just succeed so easily. So that's one thing I do appreciate about the plot of this movie. And actually, since we were just talking about the Yule Ball really quickly, Cassidy, I wanted to get your opinion on this part. So one thing I've always appreciated about this movie when it comes to the set design, I really love the recreation of the main hall, how they turned it into this sort of ice cave. I thought that was such a visually stunning piece. And is this a set piece that's ever stood out for you in particular?
I love like all the candles hanging. I think it's gorgeous. I think they made it the opposite of what the rest of the film is. So it even made it a bit more delicate. These teenagers, I think it made it like really special for them, and like a scene that was very, I don't know, it's just very like heartfelt. And so I think it definitely gave a little bit of that like romantic magical feeling, even though the rest of the film is kind of like doomsday. It's not, you don't get any of that throughout. So I think that set design was like mwah, very well done, and it was beautiful.
I feel like I love how they did this because every other time that we're seeing like this grand hall. Wait, I don't know if you already said this, Cass, but maybe I'm just repeating myself or yourself, but it's like warm with like all the candles, and this is just like such a stark difference. And I know obviously because it's like Christmas and winter and blah blah blah, but I just love how they like changed it up from like the Hogwarts that we know until to like this. I hope that makes sense.
No, yeah, it does make sense. And actually, one other thing I wanted to add on to that. So when it comes to some of the other characters, has anyone ever noticed how funny it is how this is the only movie in the franchise where all the guy characters decided to have long hair for an entire year? You know, Harry, Ron, Fred and George, even Neville. Anyone think it's funny how this is the only one where they decided to have such long hair?
I'm eating it up. I love it.
I did notice that. I feel like when you even see the photo of like the DVD case or like the movie poster, it is them all with long hair. And it is so funny that they all like had that moment at the same time. I'm like, what was pop culture going through then?
Right.
Just about to say,
They're
like, I
preparing
wonder
for the
if that was
ball.
a trend. Like, I
Yeah, it
wonder if
must have
that
been
was,
a
like,
trend.
yeah.
I don't remember what year that one came out.
2005.
I thought they had buzz cuts back then.
Yeah.
Not in the movie, like I mean in like pop culture or like I don't know, maybe they did have long hair back then.
Well, and also one thing I did want to get all your opinions on is when it comes to the mystery side of this movie. So the mystery of this is obviously who put Harry's name in the Goblet of Fire. Although in the book it focused a little bit more on that side of the story, you know, who done it. But this movie, it doesn't focus on it too much. It spends a little bit more time on the Triwizard Tournament. Do you think that it would have been better if they spent more time on that aspect of the story? Or do you think that the tournament was a little bit more important than that?
I don't know. I feel like it kind of got glazed over, and Harry was just like the special one, and everyone agreed with it, and we was like, yeah, okay, cool, and just went with it. But like looking back, it's kind of like, well, that was kind of continuity error. Like, how did that kind of slide in there? It just like made it work for the script. So like, I don't know. I think if you like are really picking at it, then yeah, absolutely. I think it's like one of those things where like that doesn't really add up, but they made it work.
I kind of feel like the tournament was a little bit more important because that's where you're getting, I don't know, I feel like the chunk of your story, but I don't know. I feel like the tournament is a little bit more important than that, but maybe they could have spent a little bit more time on like who, like the mystery.
Like I said, I was researching for this. So somebody had done a video on fourth movie and talked about the questions that were in the book that were not in the movie or that were answered without there even being a question. So I think that in the book there's a totally different like not totally different narrative, but like they're asking a lot different questions, and you know, as the viewer they're deciding to show us the answers to these questions instead of making us guess. So I agree with Hunter in the realm of the movie. I think that the Triwizard Cup is a much more interesting plot line, but it's because of the way they gave us these plot devices with like the Barty Crouch Jr. Like in the books, apparently, like the what is it, the Death Eater symbol that they do at
The Dark Mark.
the Dark Mark. Yes, thank you. They do the Dark Mark, and in the book, that's a question: who did that? We see who does it, you know, and you know we don't know who he is yet, but then they just tell us who he is, like in a flashback, you know. So there could have been a mystery of like another who is it, who did it. So I guess it's two ways. Like I would like to see that, but I could read it. And two, it's like instead of doing another whodunit, they did like different motive. So I did like that difference, I guess.
But also, one other thing that this movie gets a lot of crap for is obviously the characterization of Dumbledore. So instead of being portrayed as a calm and more wise person like in the previous film, he comes off a lot more loud and aggressive, you know, especially during the announcement when he shouts at everyone to silence and when he runs up to Harry and says, Harry, did you put your name in the Goblet of Fire? So that's obviously something that, you know, upset fans. And is this something that has ever bothered the three of you?
By the end of the series, I hate Dumbledore. I do not like his character. And I feel like in this movie, I'm like, yeah, I agree, because I feel like Dumbledore is supposed to be like this, all powerful, like mystical character. Like he's so wise and like everyone looks up to him. And I feel like, yeah, maybe we should be making him he's a real person as well. But I feel like he just loses all of his like mystery and like whimsy. And I just feel like he loses all of that throughout the series. I don't know. So I definitely just like don't like the way that he's portrayed, but I appreciate him in like the first two movies. But I don't know if that's because of like, also like the story in the first two movies is a lot more like childlike wonder. So yeah, I don't know. I really dislike his character by the end of it, kind of starting in this movie.
I agree. I think that by the end of the series, you feel differently about Dumbledore. Even in like the Fantastic Beasts, like his prequel self, you even may not like him as much in those either. You see him more as like a flawed person. And in the first two films, like Hunter says, like he's definitely like something to look up to. And then later on, like he becomes more humanized. But yeah, maybe in that fourth one, they didn't do it correctly. I also am like, is the urgency real, you know?
Yeah, I feel like to add on to that, like I feel the same way. It's like I'd love to know like have people died in this, because it feels like it's just supposed to be like this fun thing that these schools do. And if people had died in it, I feel like his urgency is like there's no way that Harry can die because I need him as a pawn in my game to like, carry out like the rest of the series. So I understand that, but the way that they kind of like establish it, it's just like a fun thing that these schools do. And I know you can get hurt and whatnot, but yeah, it's just very interesting. I agree.
The more I think about this character, the more I'm like, he is a representation of the 1% in our society, where they don't necessarily care about the innocent, but they're just doing their job. I mean, even from the jump, he was set up dropping Harry off at an abusive household when he is the one who is like almighty power. I can save all, I am all good, when in fact, he does not do what he says he does. And so I'm not sure from the start we were supposed to like him. I think he was just supposed to be the character they set him up to be in power as, and it's like our kind of subjective choice whether we see the good or bad in his actions.
Well, and also this is the movie in the franchise where they really started to introduce the romance side of things. And I know that this is probably something you guys wanted to talk about. So what is it about the Harry Potter franchise that you think it does so well when it comes to the romance? What makes it stand out for the three of you the most?
I feel like in this one, I like it a lot because it's like Ron is coming into like, I feel like he doesn't know that he likes Hermione yet, but like we can see that he does, even if he doesn't really like recognize that yet.
I think it's a nice element to add in. I mean, as people get older, those things start to come about. So it's definitely realistic. And obviously, like as the story goes, like Ron and Hermione obviously end up together. Everybody loves a good, like, what is it, drawn out romance. And I think like a lot of shows and movies do that where they do like a friend thing or drawn out, like I've said. And I think, some of it could have been done better throughout the series, but I do like it. I think it's funny because like everybody's always like Harry and Hermione, Harry and Hermione. And I am like, and I definitely, when I was younger, I used to be that person. But I think like as I got older, I was like, no, I don't know what I was thinking. Like 100% like Hermione and Ron. Did they have to have any of them get with Hermione? No, 100%. She could have like had her own like separate storyline with somebody else. I definitely think there could have been more interesting options just plot wise instead of like having this sort of like, Ron, Harry, Hermione thing that people tried to have going on.
Well, we did get something similar to that with Victor Crumb in this movie, don't forget.
Exactly. Yes, 100%. I think that she could have had like a really interesting storyline with him. I don't think he was ever going to be that like important to the further plot, but there's other people that we met that could have been more important, but or just like more interesting but I do love Hermione and Ron for sure.
I agree with mostly everything Felicity said, but I think it's the first time where we see like a strain on the friendships because of jealousy. And it is like puberty. Like they're literally getting introduced to all this stuff. So it's basically like their normal life is happening and then like their wizardy life is happening. And their normal life is like very connected to like what teenagers go through. And so they're starting to feel like, oh, I like her and you're friends with her and it gets all messy and stuff. And I think it just like adds on to the human part of what they're going through. So
I also just want to quickly add in, I really think like the Harry and Cho Chang stuff was like not necessary. I don't know. Like, yes, sure, it's cool to see him have a romantic interest, but I feel like Hermione and Ron's could have been the only one. But yeah, I don't really think, especially since he ends up with Ginny anyways. So it's like, which I love, like in the second movie, like you can see how like nervous she is. It's like adorable little school crush. And then they get married, obviously, eventually. Like that would have been more interesting to develop from instead of Cho Chang, but I don't know.
And actually, one other thing I wanted to talk to you guys about, just to get all your opinions on, was so in this movie, and I know Felicity wanted to touch on this, this is often ranked as one of the sadder entries because it's where we see the death of Cedric Diggory, played by Robert Pattinson. I gotta say, I do think that his death is definitely sad because I think Cedric was a more likable character, and I think he was a little bit more fleshed out than the other champions. So I think that might have been part of the reason why his death was sad. And also, I think Robert Pattinson's actually pretty great in the movie, in my opinion. And so I think that's part of what made his death really sad.
I just think it's so sad. I don't know if it's just because I love Robert as like a person, but it's so sad. And when he comes back with Harry, just like it's so emotional, just the way that his dad in that scene just like crushes it. But as a character, yeah, I don't know. I don't know where exactly it falls for me because I feel like we don't get enough time with him almost. Like he is the more developed, but throughout the series, like obviously it's sad, but it's not like the saddest death.
yeah, I don't think the emotional part was necessarily his death, but it was just like an innocent kid getting in the way of what was going on between Harry and Voldemort. And I think Harry felt the most because of that. Like he felt guilty for being an innocent and likable person that was just like a fair competitor. And he just lost him because of that. And so I think he took that and it was just a shock because of everything that was entangled between Cedric and just the innocence of his character.
I agree. I think like sometimes like the deaths in this series are like not needed. If you're gonna kill somebody off, make it like I think Hunter said earlier, a satisfying death. Make it mean something to the plot. And I feel like the story could have progressed without that, but also it doesn't hinder it because it happened. It makes it more memorable for sure. Like I think whenever anybody brings up this film, they bring up that death. So if they wanted it to be memorable, it definitely is. But I wish that it didn't happen, but I didn't write it, so I guess that's my
Just something to add. I feel like it does kind of add something because it's like how far Voldemort will go. Like he will just kill innocent people. Like he really does not give a fuck. And then I also think it goes to show like nobody is safe. Like not even the students in Hogwarts are safe. Like Hogwarts is supposed to be like, this really safe place where you send your kids, and we kind of see that like deteriorate in the later movies. But this is kind of where it starts, where nobody's safe and he doesn't give a fuck and he's just killing people left and right.
Well, also, now I do want to move on to the hidden detail in this movie that I think is really unique. So this is in the scene where Harry and Dumbledore are talking in his office. So as they're talking, after he sees Dumbledore's memory, when you see Dumbledore walk over and he looks through the glass, you can see contents in there that form the symbol of the Deathly Hallows. What I like about this is that J.K. Rowling said that she was inspired by the movies when she was writing the final books in the franchise, and that when she saw this, it's what inspired her to create the symbol for the Deathly Hallows when she was writing that book. And I think that that's such a cool detail because it shows how inspiring these movies really were, especially for the creator of the universe. So yeah, that's a detail that I just really, really appreciate.
Yeah, when I read that, I thought that was really interesting. It's kind of crazy to think about what the story could have been if the movies weren't made until the books were finished or something, But I think it's crazy that she was watching these movies and just like saw that one thing and was like, that's something, out of all the things in the film, like that's what connected to her.
Wait, I didn't know this. So she was not done writing the books and the movies were being shot?
No, she didn't write the final book until I think 2007, which is when the fifth movie came out.
That's crazy to me. Wow. I didn't even know that part. So I mean, I think she used her resources. She said, I'll just take what was already made and just add on. So she did her thing, I guess. Yeah, it's pretty cool. I don't know. I think that's sick. She like, it was already made and she was like, well, I'll just keep adding to it, I guess.
Yeah, I feel like that's, that's one of those shots where I would have never picked up on that. So I think it's interesting that she picked up on it. I don't know. I just think it's interesting, but my one flaw with that, like the symbol itself, is I'm like, I just don't see how the cloak is shaped as a triangle. I just like have never really understood that, to be honest. Like everything else makes sense, like the wand, the stone, okay, but then the cloak, I'm just like, I don't know, maybe I'm just like overthinking this and being silly about it, but it's just never made sense to me.
All right, guys, I think that that's the end of this discussion. If you want to go check out part 2, that'll come up in the near future. Thank you so much for listening. Cassidy, Felicity, Hunter, thank you so much for coming back.
Thanks for
Thank-
having us,
Thank
Kate.
you.
Look forward to part 2 with you guys.
Whoop, whoop.
Yes, very
Woo!
excited.
All right, guys, thanks so much for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you later.